Or you don't know what direction you're supposed to go. And maybe you're praying to God for direction, but you don't feel like you're hearing anything. Or maybe you're talking to people about it, but you don't feel like anybody's giving you the right answers. You just feel like you're on your own trying to figure it out. You're wandering around in that circle trying to figure out, should I go left, right, what should I do? Have any of you ever felt like that? You just don't know what decisions to make? Now, the second group of people, they each had a voice that they could listen to. But as you heard, one of them said, oh, I just ignored the voice. He didn't listen to it at all. He had his own plan. He was going to do his own thing. Do we ever do that in life? Do we know there's certain voices we should listen to in life, but we're kind of like, you know what, I'm just going to do my own thing. Let me just do my own thing. I got this figured out. I can make it work. And instead of listening to the voices God gives us in life, we just kind of go out and do our own thing. Or maybe like the other person, it's like, I could hear the voice, but it was kind of quiet and I wasn't sure. Sometimes maybe we're listening to certain voices that are really loud, that are telling us to do things we know we shouldn't, instead of listening to that still small voice of God who's trying to show us the way we need to go. You can take almost anything and turn it into something about a relationship with God. And what about the last one? I think that last one is kind of what life is like for all of us. You're in here trying to listen to a voice, whether it's God's voice, maybe your teachers, maybe your parents, the voices you know are trying to direct you the proper way. But there are so many things shouting at you every day, right? Things on the phone, things on the TV, things on the radio, people at school. Everybody's shouting for your attention, telling you, you should do this, you should do that, you should act like this, you should look like this, you should be like this. And instead of listening to what God says we should be like, we're listening to all these voices around us and we're totally confused. And we don't know what to do. This is what life is like. We have voices that God has given us that can direct us and that can help us to live an amazing life, that can help us have an amazing relationship with God. But if we're not listening to those voices and we're listening to all the rest of the noise around the world, we're going to miss out on everything that God has for us. So what voices are you listening to? And at the same token, what kind of a voice are you being to the world? There's a good one to think about. And that's our talk tonight. If we go to the first slide. James, you've been going through the book of James. Tonight, James is talking about the tongue. How many of you have a tongue? All right, I'm getting some participation here. Only a couple of you don't. And I don't think I want to know why you don't have a tongue. How many of you use your tongue every day? All right. What do you use your tongue for? Anybody? To eat. To speak. You're going to say eat and speak? Yeah. Anything else we use our tongues for? Yeah. To taste things. You would not be able to taste anything if it weren't for the taste buds in your tongue. Yeah. The only muscle in your body that is only connected at one, you'd think I'd know that since I prepared for this talk, but I do not know that. The only muscle in your body that's connected only on one end and not on the other is your tongue. I'm going to go check that out and make sure that's true. But it sounds cool. I like it. So tonight we're going to talk about the tongue. But when James is talking about the tongue, he is talking about the actual organ that's in your mouth. But he's talking about how the tongue can be used for a lot more than just eating, a lot more than just tasting. In fact, the tongue is a very, very, very powerful thing. As small as it is, it's extremely powerful. Next slide. In James 3:2, James lays out exactly how important the tongue is. He says this: if we could control our tongues, we would be perfect. If we could control our tongues, we would be perfect. And we could also control ourselves in every other way. If you could control your tongue, you could control everything else in your life. So do you think it's possible to control your tongue? Do you think anyone has ever been able to control their tongue? No. Jesus, I think, is the only person that was ever able to truly control his tongue. The rest of us, you're going to battle it all your life. But James says, man, if you could control that tongue, you could control your tongue, you could control everything in your life. You'd be perfect. So we're never going to control our tongues because we're never going to be perfect. But that's how important the tongue is. Next slide. So now James is the author of this book. He wrote it about 45 years after Jesus died. And there's kind of some controversy who exactly was James that wrote this. They don't think it was the disciple that was with Jesus. They think it was his half-brother. They're not sure, but let's just say he knew Jesus really well. And he was telling us what it means to become more like Christ. He was speaking to Christ's followers. And he wanted his people to be spiritually mature. He didn't want them just to kind of come to church, sit through the sermon, go and do whatever they want the rest of the week. He wanted them to really become like Jesus, to change their lives. And he said, this is one of the ways you can do it, man. You can get this controlled. You will become more like Jesus than anything else that you could do. Now, one sign of maturity is how we use our tongues. So let me ask you something. How many of you have gone in for a doctor's checkup? Have you ever had the doctor look at your tongue? Say, open your mouth, that's the tongue, and you're gagging the whole time? My daughter loves that, by the way. Why do they do that? Why in the world do they stick that thing on your tongue and look at your tongue? Yeah. Yeah. For what now? For muscular breakdown, yeah. Yeah, they got to get it out of the way so they can see down in your throat. But do you know that when the doctor's looking at your tongue, he can actually tell a lot about what's wrong with you just by looking at the tongue? The coating on the tongue, the color of the tongue, different things with the tongue will tell the doctor if there's a certain problem you're having or a certain condition you're having. Because the tongue tells them what's going on inside the body. And isn't that the truth? What you speak out of your mouth tells me a lot about what's in your heart. If you're making fun of somebody over here to the side, that tells me that your heart is not in a good place. If you're cursing at somebody because you're upset with them, that tells me your heart's not in a good place. Because whatever you're speaking out of your mouth, that's what's really inside your heart. And the doctor can tell the same thing. He can look at that tongue and he can tell kind of what's going on inside your body just by what he sees there on the tongue. And that's why they do it. Next slide. So how powerful is the tongue? I mean, that one there is pretty powerful. Look at that. It's like an 8-pack. Holy cow. I got one of those too. It's just really well hidden. So the tongue is very powerful. James compares it to the bit in the mouth of a large horse. Anybody know what the bit is in a horse's mouth? Yeah. Exactly. Yes, it's a little metal rod, goes in their mouth between their teeth, and it's attached to these cords that basically the person can pull and change the direction of the horse. I got a picture of it a little bit later. So he says the tongue is like a bit that goes in a horse's mouth. What in the world does that mean? He also says it's like a small rudder on a huge ship. Anybody here ever been on a huge ship? Gone on a cruise maybe? Oh, lucky. Do you know what the rudder is on a ship? Yeah, what is it? It's the part that you steer with. Do you know where it is? Yeah, exactly. It's at the back of the boat. Most of us, we're not really boat people, so maybe we wouldn't know that. But it's this little paddle, goes back and forth at the back of a ship. But this tiny little paddle can completely decide what direction that ship is going to go in. As big as that ship is, as heavy as it is, thousands of people that are on it, that tiny little paddle can change the direction of that ship. That's power in a very small package. And he also says the tongue is like a tiny little spark that can set a great forest on fire. You've seen these fires out in California? Just burning up the mountainsides, the hillsides, and people's homes. And a lot of times they're started from one little spark. Maybe it was a flash of lightning. Maybe it was somebody didn't put a campfire out correctly. One tiny little spark could cause so much destruction. And James is trying to get across to everybody, this is how important your tongue is. It's like a spark of fire that could cause a huge forest fire. That's how much damage you can do with your tongue if you're not controlling it. Next slide. Anybody know who these guys are? I know after hearing the Patriots won, it's even more depressing now. But anybody know who these guys are? Who's that guy on the left? Le'Veon Bell. An amazing running back. Very talented football player. Plays for the Steelers. Before the game last week when they played Jacksonville, he said out loud for everyone to hear, I love round twos, meaning this is going to be the second time we play Jacksonville. We're going to kill them this time. He said, we'll have 2 round twos back to back in the next few weeks. basically saying we're going to meet Jacksonville for a second time, beat them. We're going to meet Patriots for a second time. We're going to beat them. He already predicted we're going that far. We're going to the Super Bowl. The problem is when he said this, Jacksonville heard what he said. And man, did they get upset. They felt like they were being disrespected. They felt like they were being overlooked. They felt like the Steelers were looking past them to the very next game and didn't think they were even worth playing. Does anybody know who the other guy is on the right? I think it's hilarious that you don't know who he is because his quote last week was, "The Jaguars will know my name after this game." And none of us know his name. His name is Mike Mitchell. Yeah. He plays in the secondary, and he was talking some stuff, man, saying the Jaguars are going to know my name after this game because I'm going to be intercepting the ball. I'm going to be knocking it down. I'm going to make sure they don't score. Anybody remember how many points the Jaguars scored? 45 points. Do you think Jacksonville remembers his name? No. No. They care less about him. I mean, they called him out after the game. They wanted to see him. Hey, where's that Mike? Where's Mike? We want to see Mike. And he didn't come out, obviously. But what happened? They didn't watch the tongues. They got out there and they started talking smack. Started talking about how they were better, how they were moving on to the next week, and they lit a fire inside Jacksonville. Jacksonville was mad. And I don't know if that's why they won the game, but I bet you when they were in there blocking and hitting and tackling, I bet you they were giving just a little bit extra effort, Jacksonville, remembering what this team had said about them and wanting to prove them wrong. And they did. The tongue is powerful. Next slide. So let's look at this, what he said. I mean, James is trying to go above and beyond to let you know exactly how powerful the tongue is. He said a tiny bit can control the direction of a horse, right? And the tongue's just like that. There's what a bit looks like. It's the piece of metal that's actually inside his mouth, going from side to side. That tiny little piece of metal, when put in that position in the horse's mouth, will completely control where the horse goes. All you have to do is give a little tug, one way or another, and it will make him go in that direction. When I was little, I was riding a horse once, and I know exactly how powerful this is. It was a neighbor, and I was scared of the horse because he was huge. But they're like, oh, it's no problem. They put a little blanket over him, not a saddle, a little blanket, sat me on there, and I'm riding around with him, trying to figure out. It was great. It was wonderful. Until the blanket started slipping. And I didn't know what to do. And so I'm holding on to him, and it keeps slipping. And so as it's slipping, what am I doing? I'm grabbing the reins, and I'm trying to pull myself back up. I'm only 5. I can't pull myself back up. So what does the horse do? What does he do? He changes direction. He starts going the way I'm pulling. Unfortunately, the way I'm pulling is the way I'm falling. And so he starts going the same way with me. And the more he's going in circles, the more I'm falling. And then he starts to get kind of frustrated. He doesn't like this because he doesn't want to keep going in circles. And I'm falling more and more and more. And he's getting more and more agitated. And finally, I had to let go because I didn't know what to do. I fell on the ground, landed right on my nose. And that horse rears up in the air and comes down, and his hoof landed probably that far from my head. And then he just took off running. I mean, he could have severely injured me, if not killed me, just from that one fall. But I learned that day the power of that little bit in his mouth. One little tug in one direction yanks him in such a way where he moves. And it controls him. And in the same way the tongue does that in our mouth, it controls us. Either good things are going to come out of your mouth or bad things are going to come out of your mouth. But whatever comes out, it's going to be powerful. The tongue is just that powerful. He says it's like a small rudder that can change the course of a huge ship. There you go. Back of the ship, there's that little fin back there. That's the rudder. That little thing controls that humongous ship. If it goes slightly, the ship goes and it moves it tremendously. Just like the tongue. Tiny little thing in your mouth, but it can cause such incredible damage if you're not careful what you're saying. It says a tiny spark of a match is harmless unless it spreads. And then it's fatal. It's killer. The tongue can be a powerful force for good or for evil. So my question to you is, are you using your tongue in such a way that it's a force for good? Or are you using your tongue in such a way that it's hurting the people around you? Think about it honestly. Next slide. How dangerous is the tongue? So we talked about how powerful it is. But James doesn't want to just stop there. He wants you to know it's dangerous too. James says the tongue is a flame of fire. It can set your whole life on fire. That's a pretty powerful image. So is that. He says it is a flame of fire and it can set your whole life on fire. People don't talk like that unless they're really trying to get a point across. He's trying to let you know how serious the tongue is. Look at the next thing he says. The tongue is wicked. It corrupts the entire body. Nobody can tame the tongue. You can tame animals, tame wild horses, some wild beasts. But you cannot tame the tongue. Nobody can tame the tongue. Nobody can make a person say one thing or say another thing. It's evil, and it's full of deadly poison. Did you ever think your tongue this way? Like this evil, deadly poison that could kill people? Probably not. You thought, it helps me eat food. I can lick things with it. But you never really thought about how powerful your tongue can be. James wanted to make sure that the church knew this is a big deal. If you can figure this one out, you are one step closer to becoming like Jesus and to really making a difference in your world. Next slide. I thought that was kind of an appropriate image. It's very disturbing, but it's a very appropriate image. Your tongue can be like a fist punching someone if you're not careful what you're saying. That guy doesn't really have a hand coming out of his mouth, just in case you think. It's computer graphics. But your tongue can be like that. You could say something so hurtful to a person that it's like you're punching them right upside the face. Just in your words. Just what you say. In fact, your tongue could have a lot more damage than if you actually hit the person. Because you hit a person, they're going to heal a few days later. Some things that you say may stick with a person for the rest of their life. Can I be honest with you for a minute? When I was in 6th grade, I was a bit heavier of a kid. And there was this one day where I decided I was going to wear this new cowboy shirt that I got from my parents. And a cowboy hat that went with it. And I thought it looked pretty good. So I was going to go to school that day, and I was pretty proud. I was going to wear my cowboy hat and my cowboy shirt. Soon as I got on campus, the first kid that saw me pointed at me and started laughing. And then another kid started laughing. Look at his hat! Look at that hat! That's crazy! Making fun of me. Immediately the hat came off. And then other kids started laughing. I realized, oh my gosh, I can't take the shirt off. Like I'm going to have to wear this all day. And all day long, I walked around seeing people laughing or smiling or making jokes about this shirt that I was wearing. Now, in the scope of life, is that a big deal? No, I wore a shirt that the kids didn't like. But for me, it was huge. Because I went in that day thinking that I was doing something great, and they knocked me down and made me feel like nothing just by laughing at me and pointing out what they didn't like about me that day. And to this day, I still remember that day when I wore the shirt that everybody laughed at. And I never wore that shirt or that hat again the rest of my life. And you've probably had moments like that. I bet each of you have had some moment where something happened, somebody made fun of you, somebody teased you about something, and you're still not able to get over it. You just can't let it go because it eats away at you or it bothers you so much. That's how much damage you can do by one word that you say. Maybe you've been on the other end. Maybe you made fun of someone. Or you laughed at somebody. Or pointed out something to someone you didn't think was a big deal. But maybe to this day, that person's still affected by it. It still bothers them. James says the tongue is set on fire by Gehenna, or hell. And I actually tried to research this a little bit, and I found out that Gehenna was a place just outside of Jerusalem where they burn their garbage. And the fires burn there 24 hours a day. So again, he's trying to get them to understand that your tongue is like that place where the garbage is being burned 24 hours a day. Your tongue can be that disgusting and vile and revolting if you don't get it under control. He says the tongue is like a stain on a white shirt. You can have this beautiful white shirt, but you get one little drop of spaghetti sauce on it, it will stand out, and that's all anybody will see, that one little stain on your shirt. And he said the tongue's the same way. One little thing you say wrong can completely stain you and stain the person that you're talking about. The tongue feels like it needs to protect itself and destroy others. And many times that's what happens when somebody's putting someone else down. They're trying to protect themselves by making that person look worse than them. It's sick, the things that people do. And it's amazing that one little tongue can completely change a person's life forever. It can destroy a person's life. Next slide. You guys won't be familiar with these guys up at the top because you weren't born yet. The rest of us that were around remember them very well. These two young men right here, Harris and Klebold, they lived in Columbine, Colorado. Maybe you've heard of the place. What happened back in 1999 was a horrible, horrible day where these two teenagers decided they'd finally had enough, and nobody completely understands why they did what they did, but they have some theories. But they finally had enough. And as you can see on the bottom, they went into their school one day with guns and just started shooting people. They killed a dozen students that day and a teacher. Wounded many, many others before they finally turned the guns on themselves and killed themselves. And as people were looking into the past, what would have done this? What would have made this happen? They realized that these guys were kind of outcasts. They were the guys that maybe people made fun of. Maybe people bullied. People didn't want to be around. People didn't like them, thought they were weird, whatever it might be. And over the years, these things that people said, these things that people did began to build inside them, and it turned into a rage, and it turned into a fire. And maybe they had other reasons they did what they did as well, but everybody believes that that's one of the things that led them to finally just snap and say enough. And they just wanted to end it all. Think about that. What a powerful influence what you say can have on a person's life. Look at this gentleman here, Alex. Some of you may know him. He went to Franklin Regional. Went into school one day with 2 knives and started stabbing people. Found out later he was inspired by these 2 people up here. He had read about them. He had learned about them. He as well felt like an outcast, felt like people didn't respect him. Finally had enough. That is how powerful the tongue is. You could build a person up and make them feel like $1 million and make them feel like the child of God that they really are, or you can completely tear someone down and destroy their life with your tongue. And this is why James devotes a whole chapter to talking about this, because it's that important. Next slide. And also the tongue is deceptive. How deceptive? Your tongue can be saying one thing out of one side of the mouth, and it's saying something different over on the other side. You can be talking about how you love this person, oh, they're so great or whatever, and then when you get with your friends over this side, you talk bad about them and say all the things you don't like about them. The tongue can literally be praising God one minute and cursing someone the next minute because you're upset. Parents going home from church, maybe. Kids going home from church, maybe. Look at the tongue itself. I think this is kind of cool. My daughter showed this to me. I'm like, I want to put this in. Your tongue is used for taste, right? And it's got 4 different zones. You got the bitter zone, the sour zone, the salty zone, and the sweet zone. And that's very much the way the tongue is when we talk, right? Sometimes we're sweet. Sometimes we're a little salty. Sometimes the things we say are sour, and sometimes the things we say are really bitter. Yeah. That's false. Well, when it comes to talk, it's not false. Our talk is like that. Well, what is it? Because where is the bitter? Where do you taste bitter on your tongue? You don't know. All right, well, I'm going to go with this for right now until they come out with a new one. Pluto's not a planet, so maybe this is true. But look at this. The tongue is very deceptive. And he talks about it in the Bible. He says you can speak truth one moment, and the next you can destroy people. You can build someone up, and then you can tear them down. This isn't the way life is supposed to be, guys. Jesus said, let your yes be yes and your no be no. When you say something, mean it. And if you don't have anything good to say, for heaven's sakes, don't say it. Because look at the damage you can do to someone. Next slide. You can't be a happy guy on one side, grumpy guy on the next. You're one or the other. Just like a freshwater spring. They can't have fresh water in there and salty water. It's only going to be fresh. A cherry tree can't grow olives on it. It's a cherry tree. It's not a cherry olive tree. So we as Christians can't be saying nice things one minute and terrible things the next. Can't be talking good about someone and then behind their back saying terrible things about them. That would be like a cherry tree growing olives. It's just not the way it's supposed to be. If you really are a follower of Christ, you should be speaking in a way that builds people up so they can become more like Christ. A Christian should not praise God and then destroy the people around them that are made in God's image. God made every single person in his image, even the people that drive you crazy. He made them in his image, and we're to love them because Jesus loves them. Next slide. Almost finished here. So the tongue can be a powerful force for incredible good, or it can be an incredible force for evil. And we have the choice to do what we will with our words. We can build people up or we can completely destroy them. If we are Christians, we're new creations. So we have to try to see other people the way God sees them. God made them in his image and he loves them. He loved them so much he was willing to die for each and every one of us. So we need to love those around us the same way that he did. And we also need to be careful which voices we're listening to. So not only do you need to be careful what you say, but going back to that thing we did earlier, what voices do you listen to in life? Who do you listen to? Do you listen to your friends? Do you listen to your teachers? Do you listen to your parents? Do you listen to God? What voices are you listening to? Because I tell you, whichever voices you listen to, that's going to shape who you become. And that's going to predict who you are going to be when you grow up and how you're going to treat the people around you. So not only do we need to be careful what we say, but we need to be very careful who we listen to. So with that in mind, I want you guys to break into your small groups. I have a list of questions I want you to go through. Try to be honest with these because I feel like when we're discussing in small groups, that's the time when we can really open up and share real things. Really try to be real with your answers to this and just think about your own life. The things that you say, the things that you've heard, and how we can make things differently. Thanks for listening tonight, guys.